Hey, thank you for joining us this week at Lighthouse Community Church. We're always so happy to have you. These past few weeks have been super crazy because, for the past few months, we've been planning what church is going to look like in the near future, about maybe meeting up or not singing or all these different ideas. But these past few weeks, everything's been opening up and the number of cases have been rising steadily. So that actually throws a few roadblocks for our planning. So especially when I'm planning for Zoe, right? It's like, do we meet up? Do we stay locked up forever? Do we just like do outdoor events? And as I'm kind of stressing over all these like small details, I can't help but reminisce about my years as a teen in youth group. And I think about my youth pastor, and he's like so laid back, and he had like no reservations for anything. And it's not like I'm complaining, right? Not at all, because I've loved my time at my youth group. But the fondest memories always revolved around actually the stupidest and the most dangerous activities that we did together. And this is how we were always convinced into doing it. So my youth pastor, he would kind of come up with this like super grand, crazy idea, and everyone would just reject it initially, right? They'd be like, no, that's just stupid. But with his silver tongue and with his argument, he would end every argument with kind of like a soft and soothing, just trust me. Right? Just trust me. And for some odd reason, we always listened. We always did trust him. Whether our concerns were like, yo, isn't it illegal to fit 7 people into a 5-seater car? Just trust me. Or yo, isn't it dangerous to climb this huge building and structure? I mean, it's so high up that if we fall, we could literally die. Just trust me. Or are you sure we should be running around elementary schools shooting each other with pellet guns? Because people might think they're real guns and call the cops. Just trust me. And we did, right? And we listened. And though it was at the risk of our dying or being criminally charged, we actually had the time of our lives, right? We even named the time after youth group, and we called it Stupid Saturdays. And it was weird because nothing fatal ever really happened, right? I mean, like we get the occasional sprain or rolled ankle or scars and cuts, but no deaths, right? No permanent disabilities. But now, as I kind of think back about it, though, you know, I have a lot of warm feelings and nostalgia towards it, I'm just like, man, how did we get tricked into doing all those things? Because they are so stupid and dangerous, right? Like we even knew it was stupid. We called it Stupid Saturdays. Why did we even listen to the guy? And I guess it's just because we really love the guy, and he always assured us that things would be okay. And surely enough, 12 years later, I'm here, all my friends are here, we're all alive, and we're doing fine, and that blows my mind. But that leads us into the theme for our message today. Right? As we continue the series in the life of Peter, we come across this odd story that forces us to ask the question, who are you listening to? And this is important for us to be aware of because all of us are listening to someone or something. Right? As we're talking to our friends, or as we're swiping through Instagram stories, or watching movies, or scrolling through Reddit, or driving by bus stop advertisements, someone or something is always telling us a message. Even when you're completely alone, in the dark, laying on your bed, your mind is also a voice telling you a message. Like, it could be like, oh, you should have eaten that extra fry today, or wouldn't it be awesome to drive a Tesla, right? There are voices everywhere, right? And not in a crazy schizophrenic way, but in a way where we are always exposed to some message. With that said, how do you know who and who not to listen to? I mean, sure, maybe you're thinking, it doesn't really matter, especially as you're watching YouTube trying to figure out whether Popeyes or KFC is better, but it is going to matter. It is going to cost you everything when it comes to the big questions in life. Throughout history, right, it seems that that all humans have the same universal questions, and they're pretty much these 4. Where are we from? What are we doing? What is good? And where do we find meaning and purpose? And every human has to eventually answer these questions. And actually, all worldviews, all religions, all cultures actually offer different answers, however good or crazy they may be. But as we're dealing with this huge plethora of different worldviews and religions and answers, where do we even start? Our story today actually teaches us two things, right? So the first thing is that we need to listen to God over other people's opinions. And the second is we need to listen to God over our own opinions. We're going to be spending our time going through these 2 points, starting with the first. So we need to listen to God over other people's opinions. So I'll kind of just get us into the story that we're dealing with today. It takes place during a time where Jesus, he was becoming super popular and his name was spreading throughout the regions, and he's getting this huge following. He's getting like thousands of retweets every day. And you know, with any celebrity, there are a lot of rumors and speculations floating around and building up, and the disciples, they hear it all, right? And maybe to an extent, they actually believe some of it. So one day, Jesus asked the disciples straight up. He's like, who do the crowds say I am? And they know the answers. They've been hearing it all the time. So there are a lot of different answers, and they're saying it out loud. They're like, John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, maybe like one of the prophets. And then Jesus kind of flips the question and turns it towards the disciples. Who do you say I am? And that's where our passage starts today. So join me in Matthew 16 to 17 as I read. So here's verse 16. Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven." Boom. Bang on, right? That was the right answer. Jesus praises Peter for it, and Jesus points out that this is not something that Peter got from other human beings that he was told. No, because we know that the general consensus and the culture's opinion of Jesus were all wrong. No. Peter learned it from God himself, specifically through the person of Jesus, right? Because having been with Jesus for a long time now, and having seen Jesus' life, his actions, his miracles, and his effect for others firsthand, Peter knew the truth for himself from experience and from observation. And based off of this, he believed completely that Jesus was the Messiah, Savior of Israel, and Son of God, the Lord. This is a huge development in Peter's faith, because if you recount the events of Peter, like for example, Peter being scared on a boat during a storm, or Peter failing to walk on water, or even like literally just a few verses before this passage, stressing over not having enough food. Jesus' constant critique of Peter and the disciples was that they had such little faith, right? They were not confident in the person of Jesus. Like they saw the power and the greatness of Jesus, and yet their lives and their worries and their thoughts did not reflect that. But finally, in this instance here, Peter started to kind of put things together, and he comes to his own conclusion. And it's based on the evidence that he's seen for himself, and that's the way it should be, right? One thing that makes Christianity different from other religions is that we're only expected to believe things if we have good evidence, right? We're supposed to experience the power and the truth of Jesus for ourselves, and it's once we come to the truth for ourselves through experience and observation that we can live it out properly and accordingly. Ever since I could remember, growing up, I was more or less pretty friendly, right? And I don't know, especially to like people who I always thought were like alone or suffering from, loneliness, right? And I think it might have come from the fact that my parents were pastors. So the occasional Sunday, they would bring some random up to me, and they're like, "Tim, go talk to this person." So I did, and I didn't mind, but growing up, I kind of continued that. I continued doing that. And I remember my friends usually tease me for it, especially in high school, right? My cool wannabe gangster friends would tease me for being a friend of losers and weirdos. And the honest truth is, I didn't mind at all, right? I liked it. Not the fact that they were making fun of me, but I liked experiencing knowing unique people, or the idea that I'm one of the few people who actually knows the inner workings of these losers and weirdos, and I loved it. And people actually just thought I was like really compassionate or sacrificial, and they thought I hated hanging out with these people, but because I was a saint, I put up with them and I tolerated them. But to be honest, I genuinely like these people. Right? They're interesting. They're fun. They bring about new ways to think about life and to enjoy life. And over the years, a lot of them have become genuine friends that I still keep in contact with. And if you're thinking whether you're one of them, just my answer is no. But see, the idea is that in my experience, for the most part, these people who have been socially outcasted, they have become gems of joy in my life. But then I imagine this other world where, what if I just listened to my friends? What if I just listened to the words of others and I followed that? Then I would probably have never even tried to get to know these people, right? I would have lost these great, lasting, unique friendships. And that's why I'm so grateful that I actually went out of my way to find the truth of these friends for myself. And if you go back to our Bible story, Peter learned to find the truth for himself instead of solely relying on people's opinions. And we need to do that as well, right? Just as Peter's faith developed out of an experience of Jesus, we can also have that in many ways, right? The Bible tells us that one way to experience Jesus is to actually participate in church. Meaning not just turning on the live stream and putting it in the background, but actually joining together with people who are on God's mission and to commit to God's work with them and to do God's will together. Jesus said once in John 7:17 that anyone who chooses to do the will of God will find out whether Jesus' teaching comes from God or not. And this means that we experience the truth of Jesus as we do God's will. Right? As we love people radically, as we seek a kind of happiness that can only come from God, as we join God in his mission to make disciples and to empower people for the work of eternity, I want to encourage you, get involved as you pursue the truth and experience of Jesus. Attend a Bible study, not just for the sake of checking it off a list, but to press into the truth, to know Jesus more. Find a way to serve people in a way you've never done before. Reflect on major commitments in your life and see if that fulfillment you get from those commitments, if that's actually lasting. And as you experience this relationship with God for yourself, you will know God in a way that nobody could tell you. That's our first point. As we move to our second point, it's we need to listen to God over our own opinions. See, after Peter proclaimed Jesus as Messiah and Son of God, Jesus praised Peter and started to explain to the disciples what he must do now, right? Jesus said that he had to go to Jerusalem to suffer by the hands of the nation's leaders and then die. And then he also said he'd be raised back to life in 3 days, but no one ever hears that part because they just don't get it. It's too weird. Anyways, right away, Peter stopped Jesus and he was like, whoa, time out. Get over here, Jesus. We need to have a talk. And it kind of reminds me of what my mom does with my dad, especially at the dinner table, especially with guests, right? Because sometimes he would say something funny or weird or insensitive, and then all of a sudden you would simultaneously see the table jerk, and then you'd hear like this blunt smack sound, and everybody at the table knew that my mom like kicked my dad under the table. But she, it was weird because she would go on eating as if nobody knew, because she thought that she discreetly rebuked my dad by doing it under the table. the Bible tells us that Peter rebukes Jesus, right? He's kicking Jesus under the table, taking him to the side and saying, "What are you thinking? What are you saying?" Right? Jesus, this will never happen over my dead body. And at first it actually sounds noble, but then how does Jesus react? What does Jesus reply with? Well, let's find out together with verse 23. Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." What? What is happening in our story? I mean, like Peter just had this great enlightenment moment where he was praised for identifying Jesus as Messiah and Son of God. And then as Jesus was sharing his plan, Peter rejects it. And then Jesus calls Peter Satan along with other harsh words. Like, what's happening? Well, to know a bit more, let's dive into the head of Peter and even the other disciples, right? Peter was only saying what made sense to him. How could the Messiah die? How could the Savior of Israel die? Like, what a terrible plan. What would it mean for Peter's hope? Because in the heads of the 12 disciples, the hope of their future looked like this. Jesus becomes the great king of Israel. He overpowers the Romans. And what does that mean for the 12 disciples? It means that they're top dogs, right? They're commanders and they're generals and they're lords and they're second in control, second in command. And imagine all the power and the greatness that comes with that. But Jesus just said he was going to die? No way. There's something off here. The plan's wrong. So Peter rebukes Jesus and Jesus rebukes Peter for rebuking Jesus. Now this is Jesus's diagnosis and prescription for Peter, right? The diagnosis is that Peter only had human concerns in his mind, but not the concerns of God. Now, what can Peter do with this? The prescription that Jesus gave was that instead of trying to be the leader of Jesus and to control Jesus, Peter should take his place as a follower. Right? Even the fact that Peter thought he had the authority to rebuke Jesus, even after knowing Jesus was Messiah and Son of God, that meant that Peter thought that he knew better than God. And that sounds crazy, but I'm guilty of that so often as I point at God. I'm like, "God, what are you doing? Like, you're messing everything up." No, right? That's wrong. So when Jesus said, "Get behind me," it meant that Peter had to resume his place as a follower and as a learner of Jesus, not as an equal peer or not as the leader of Jesus, right? It means to trust Jesus as Savior and Lord. Also, if you're wondering why Jesus had to go the extra mile and call Peter Satan, it's because Peter tried to push Jesus towards the same direction and destiny that Satan tried to push Jesus in Matthew 4. Right? To not die, to become a worldly king, to have everything. And that was the total opposite reason for why Jesus came. Jesus didn't come to have everything. Jesus came to give up everything so that we may have life. So the concerns of humans, right? It made Peter believe that the greatest thing he could aim for was greatness for maybe 50 years, half a century at most, right? But the concerns of God, well, it's actually making humanity great for eternity through a relationship with Jesus. I think we're meant to identify with Peter here. Right? Our opinions, sometimes they can get us to the right answer, but sometimes it can lead us straight to doing Satan's work. And that's so scary, right? That's like, how do we even know? And actually, in the book of Proverbs, our wise author gives us a warning label for the voice in our head, for our own opinion. And the warning label says this. It's from Proverbs 14:12. "There is a way that appears to be right, but in the end, it leads to death." Whoa. Isn't that terrifying? That there is a way, a voice, a choice that seems so obviously right, and yet it leads to the worst thing ever, becoming an enemy of God. And it's like, if it's in our heads, how do we know which way is right? Well, the single greatest way to ground our lives is with the Bible. Right? The Bible is like food for our soul. A long time ago, there was an indigenous American Christian who went up to a missionary because he was so troubled, right? He was saying that he wanted to do the things God wanted him to do, but he was always failing. He was always doing the opposite. And he described this tension and conflict within himself as a dog fight, right? It's like he had two dogs within himself fighting each other constantly, and one represents good and one represents evil. And as the missionary heard this, he asked, which dog wins the fight within you? The man, he took a moment to think about it. And then he came to a conclusion. He said, the dog that wins is the one I feed. And the dog that loses is the one I starve. This is very much the fight within us, between God's voice and between our own voice. Even Paul in Romans 7 struggles with this fight. We need to feed the dog we want to win. So ask yourself, are you actually feeding yourself? Are you actually growing in your application of the Bible? Are you actually developing proper habits of aligning your life with God's will and with the things of eternity? Because if you think about it, our life's like a game of tug of war between our culture and Jesus, right? And if we just chill in neutral, then then we'll be swept away by the way of culture. So make sure you are feeding your soul with biblical truths. And how do you know you're getting enough Bible? How do you know you're going the right way? Well, let's look at a scene from The Matrix to kind of think about this. If you haven't seen it, I'm sorry for spoiling it, but it's been 20 years. That's on you more. There's a scene where the main character, Neo, is fighting the enemies in the virtual world, right? The world that we know, but in reality is fake. And suddenly he has this huge realization, this enlightenment, and he can see the whole world as a computer code for himself, right? So he sees everything, he sees the working of the world, and only he can see it. And once he sees this, he actually becomes immensely powerful because of it, and he becomes pretty much like God level within this virtual world, right? He can understand everything, and that's what it's like when you know the Bible. When you know the Bible, you know the very code that created the universe. You understand why everything is happening and how everything in your life fits together perfectly, and you know exactly what to do because you have in mind the concerns of God, not the concerns of humans. That's what happens when you really understand the Bible. And most of us, it's hard to get there, but if you're reading the Bible and it's changing you to become more and more like that, then you're on the right track. That concludes our message for today. We'll end with a recap. So we're talking about two things today. The first one is that we need to listen to God's voice over other people's opinions. And we do that by experiencing Jesus for ourselves, through obeying his will for us and participating in the community of Jesus. And the second one is that we need to listen to God's voice over our own opinions, right? When we do this by pressing into the Bible. Let's end with a response. Let's end with the Lord's Prayer. It goes like this. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Thank you for joining us today. Go in peace and serve the Lord.